Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for another COS at Home webinar. My name is Jonathan Viot. I am the Past States Regional Director, and thanks for hanging in there with us. We were having a little bit of technical difficulties. The other gentleman on the screen is the author of Stolen Sovereignty, the host of the Conservative Review podcast, and the senior editor of The Blaze, Mr. Daniel Horowitz. Daniel, how are you doing this evening?
Well, it's great to be with you guys. I mean, COS has really the most sincere, most educated, most dedicated grassroots activists. So at a time like this, that's the foxhole you want to be in.
Amen. Amen. So, folks, if you're new to the webinar, I just want to go through a few quick things here. Two of my colleagues are actually in the background, Monica Sellers and Susan Peters. They'll be answering some of your questions. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it into the question and answer. They'll be able to get to you. However, there are a lot of you on the call tonight, so if we're not able to get to all of your questions, we do apologize. I also wanted to mention that if you were wondering, yes, this is being recorded, and a link of the recording will be emailed to you immediately after the webinar has concluded and the recording is available. So don't worry about it. If you miss anything, you got to run to the bathroom. The link will be sent to you and you'll be able to check out the recording. We also have a couple of different things available for you to download off on the side there. So there are a couple of different handouts. The first handout is the COS Pocket Guide, which if you haven't had a chance to check this thing out, you're going to really want to do this. It gives you all the information about Convention of States, goes through some of the opposition questions and how to answer them. It's just a great, great tool. So feel free to download that. The other thing that we have there is also the Pocket Constitution. I think it's self-explanatory, but you can go ahead and download that. The other thing that we have, things that we have are some great literature. We have an unbelievable graphic arts team for Convention of States, and they put together some incredible pieces of literature. The first one that we have for you, we had it on our last webinar, and that was to slam the door on socialism. You're going to want to check that one out. And the other one that we have is called The Lamp of Experience, and it's an article written by Professor Robert Nadelson, and he talks about why adding amendments to the Constitution is really, really important. So you definitely want to check those two out. The last thing I want to say for the housekeeping items, we do have our next guest booked, ready to go for March. But if you want to know who that is, you'll have to stick around to the end, and then we'll go ahead and let you know who's going to be joining us in March. You're going to want to stick around, I assure you. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Daniel, again, thank you so much for joining us. So, I've been a fan of yours. I've listened to the podcast. I've read a lot of the different articles that you put out, whether it's been Conservative Review or now The Blaze. You're just excellent. Everything that you do is amazing. And I know that you've been a supporter of Convention of States for a while, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure why. I don't actually think that I know the reason. So could you tell us why you not only support Convention of States, but you've really kind of pushed the movement and advocated for people to get involved? Why is that?
Well, Jonathan, imagine had you asked that question just 12 months ago. I think the contours of the answer would have been similar, but not quite like today. Now the answer is why not? The reality is that you say I put out a lot of information, I have a lot of podcasts, and obviously I have a tremendous amount of articles and publications on an array of issues. It's not working. It's clearly not working. And unlike maybe some colleagues in this industry, I'm not here to watch my words and see my name in lights or listen to my voice or certainly see my face. That's for sure. I want to make a difference. And I've been at this, I've been doing primaries, I've been doing every federal angle I could find. It's irremediably broken. And I think the starting point of the Convention of the States might even be more important than the Convention of the States. It's the premise that what we are doing is not working, and that should be abundantly clear. That tyranny continues to grow the more Republicans get power. Obviously, our recourse seems to narrow every time. Whether it's any measure of culture, profligacy, hedonism, now basic, I would say liberties, but it's more than that, human rights with the COVID fascism are taken for granted, and we don't really have a voice. I mean, we're left without anything now. This is more than about questions of the election and Trump. This is life, liberty, and property. We just don't have it. We don't have anything. A lot of people ask me why I live in Maryland. You know, that's a kind of a garbage place to live. And my family's been here for many generations. My roots are here. Everyone I know is here. I lived here my whole life, so it's hard to move. But if I had a place to move to that offered life, liberty, and property, even a fraction of what it was supposed to be during the constitutional era, I would move there in a second. West Virginia is about 80 miles from me. So a lot of people are very despondent now. Well, Biden's president and Democrats control the House and the Senate. Man, what are we going to do? There's nothing we can do. And who's running for 2024? Who's the candidate? Let's focus on the next election. And missing the point that we had trifecta control at a federal level, didn't work. You could get Ron DeSantis as president. He's a dear friend of mine, and I think he's the gold standard for a conservative elected official. But as president, very limited is what he could do. We're seeing every agency of every department is irremediably broken. We've seen that you can't work the Senate Republicans, that House Republican leadership. They're not on board. Maybe he could fill in the gaps in a couple of places where Trump was a little bit inconsistent and maybe not as schooled on the issues. Not much. And I say that as someone who believes he's the best option we have. We can't wait 4 years anyway. That's the other thing. They are literally purging conservatives from the military. There's news on that this hour. They're coming after us for First Amendment. They are criminalizing at a federal level our breathing, our breath. I mean, Jonathan, 12 months ago, when we said in the nightmare scenario, man, if the left ever gets in charge, could you imagine what they might do? I would have never thought they would criminalize life itself, breathing itself, our ability to enjoy just national parks or even the outdoors and breathe with our children, that children couldn't go to school without child abuse. I could have never imagined that. I mean, that is obvious. So now, well, this is the feds. This is Maryland. I'm 80 miles away from West Virginia, very close to the West Virginia Panhandle. There's a Republican governor. There's a Republican attorney general. And they have majorities in the legislature that are bigger than what the Democrats hold in California. Maybe I'll go there. Guess what? They have the same COVID fascism there. They have the same everything there. The battle of our time is this. Before we talk about what we do with the House and the Senate in Washington with a 50-50 Senate where 90% of the Republicans are leftists, big government folks, why are we not even utilizing the 15 to 20 or so states that have Republican supermajorities? Where are we on the ground? Why are we not having an inflection point where they are forced to convert or die? Either you go along with the 70% in your state who voted with Trump and what that represents beyond Trump, or you're primaried. This is where Convention of States comes in. I know it took a long time there, but the idea is the solution is not in Washington. Our revolution was catalyzed by committees of correspondence that were created through the state legislatures. They created the Constitutional Convention. It was a matter of people being outraged, disquieted, refusing to abide by unconstitutional edicts, and working with their lowest, the doctrine of least magistrate, your county and state officials, to interpose between yourself and federal encroachments. That is the only option we have. But again, the good news is you don't have to change hearts and minds among the people. Okay, we're talking about just in the states where Trump carried 83% of the county governments. So Convention of the States, to me, and we'll talk about the convention itself and what that does, but to me, that is the surgery. That's step 2. It's the process of getting acquainted with your legislature, getting acquainted with the process, making people focus on the legislative sessions. It's almost like NASA went to the moon, but they didn't really learn much from the moon. Well, hopefully the convention will be more successful than that. But, they say they created Velcro, other things as a result of that. It's the process of making state legislatures great again, and more granular, making self-governance great again. That we now could say, look, this is our government, this is our people. We don't have to be doing this. This is a constitutional sanctuary. And again, that's not going to be done in Washington. It's going to be done in the legislatures. And what I'm saying is you're already starting with, the founders were very smart. They gave us states. And states, they're much more slanted towards us because of the way the districts are, the fact that smaller states are more conservative. But when you control a state, you control an individual unit of government. When you control a county, you control an individual unit of government. You look at Oklahoma, North Dakota, Idaho, we're talking about 4-to-1 majorities there. Now, these Republicans are very problematic, but they're a lot easier to deal with than California, than New York. We don't have to be governed by California and New York. We don't have to be governed by DC. This is a recognition that people like myself, I'm willing to move from Maryland, but I need to have states where we do have liberty. And right now, we don't really have that in any single state. It's within arm's length. And that's really where I think getting involved in COS will find like-minded people that will work on a state level. So while we're saying, look, we don't have to take this garbage from Washington, let's pass the COS applications in, I guess you need about another 19 more states. But at the same time, what about the 15 states we already passed and have a great grassroots there? How about passing constitutional sanctuaries? How about North Dakota has HB 1164? My friend Representative Tom Kading there, that will simply criminalize the enforcement of any Biden edict that is not pursuant to statute or the Constitution. Every state needs to adopt that. So the process that you guys are plowing works not just for the application for limiting government, term limits, balanced budgets, but all the issues, the triage that we need now that we can't wait till we get 34 states. And I do think it's within reach. It's the process of making states great again. That's why I've gotten involved.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Governor DeSantis. I actually just moved here with my family to Florida from New Jersey. And Governor DeSantis happens to be an endorser of Convention of States. I don't know if you're aware of that, but he did endorse COS. But just to kind of get back to what you were saying there a minute ago, over the last year, you've talked about it. The last 12 months, you've been at the forefront of fighting back against the COVID fascism. And let me pause here for a minute and say the disease itself is real, okay, folks, and that does have an impact on people. I'm not trying to say anything about that, and I feel like that's something, the disclaimer you almost always have to put in here when you're having that conversation. But the disease is real. The reaction by local, state, and federal governments is fascistic. I think that there's no other way to describe it. And you've been at the forefront of fighting back and pushing back against that. And you talked about self-governance. And I think what we've been trying to do with Convention of States is promote this idea of a culture of self-governance. And that would prevent, I think you'd agree with this, that this would prevent something like that from happening again. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about what a culture of self-governance might look like? You also mentioned that the founders gave us these states, and we really need to return to the state legislatures. Why is that? What were the founders trying to do with state sovereignty, right? That's almost something that your book, Stolen Sovereignty, it might be stolen state sovereignty, because that's gone. Could you talk about that a little bit more, and where the culture of self-governance could play in restoring that sovereignty?
And that's what the book is all about. Literally stolen sovereignty, federal, state, and individual. It's all stolen. Each respective lane that it's supposed to be in, government's supposed to protect the sovereignty of the whole union. The border, they're waving them in literally now from the Haitians are being bussed in with no COVID concerns, of course, that could be used to lock us down. And then, the things that the states should be doing, the feds do, the things the feds should be doing, the states do. And most importantly, there's 3 relationships in the Constitution. There's not just legislative, judicial, and executive in terms of branches of government, but there's 3 layers: the federal, the state, and individuals. And I think what we need to understand is that there's certain things the Fed should be doing. States have a broader latitude, but at the same time, there are certain things that are out of bounds. You cannot control the breathing of a human being. That is Blackstone's definition of staying in locomotion without restraint. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking to do an action. I'm asking to literally stay in locomotion and not have my essence, my existence be criminalized without me taking an affirmative action against my existence. That is something that it shocks me. And I love your introduction there, because what bothers me about the debate as it started in March and April, it seemed to be a debate over the severity of the virus. And I have a lot to say about that. How it affects, who it affects, what it is, what it isn't. It is exaggerated to an extent, but that's not the important point. Because the important point is God confronts us with pretty serious things from time to time. It could be man-made disaster. It could be a God-made challenge that he wants us to come closer to him and pray and repent and whatever it is. But there are legitimate challenges in the world. Here's the thing. Who's to say government should solve and has the ability to solve? And I think 10 months later, we should all realize that even if you believe, please, I'm terrified, government save me, they don't have the answers. I mean, they did the moon dance, the rain dance. They've done everything you could ever do to a human being, and it spread everywhere. You look at the charts, and I don't want to get too much into this rabbit hole, but just as a cursory glance, what we've seen is this is remarkably from God. It's remarkably natural. It doesn't mean it's not a bitter pill and there's not a degree of tragedy for certain people. But what it means is you look seasonally and geographical, and it's remarkable, has the same epidemiological curve. I mean, I guess people decided to wear masks and not wear masks on the same hour, on the same day in Florida as they did in Alabama, and in Arizona as they did in New Mexico. It's astounding. In Israel, it's going down because of the vaccine, right? Well, not really. It's going down in Cyprus and Greece too now, because the winter spread is over, is going down. There's nothing you can do. And the thing I think we should all learn is that if it's not constitutional, if it's a fundamental right that they're going after, you know what? It's probably not a good idea either. The founders gave the states and the feds respectively ample authority to take care of what they can and what they should. And if they ever tell you that, you know what, I get what you're saying, but this is an exception. A noun, a verb, and COVID, poof, your rights disappear. Justice Jackson, Robert Jackson, who was the lead prosecutor at Nuremberg, he was the lead dissenter in Korematsu, and he wrote a famous dissent in the Youngstown case where he said, there is no constitutional emergency exception to fundamental rights, and that was by design, except for habeas corpus during a time of rebellion. And that's it. There is no public health exception. People forget that. Everyone's talking about, well, states have the right, right? No, states do not have that right. States could target a problem. You have a fire, a wildfire. I could go to the fire. If I need to set up a command post and your home is there, statutes talk about this. I could go and set it up. I have to compensate you, by the way. That's the Fifth Amendment and various state constitutional clauses. But to just say, virus, here, masks, on, business, shut, it doesn't work that way. You can't categorically just suspend natural law, much less constitutional rights, without showing your work. And quarantine meant you have Ebola. There's 5 cases. There's 7 cases. It's not transmissible. So by definition, you can quarantine it. These guys have it, so you're quarantined. But every human being, all the time, no matter what, you have symptoms, you don't, you had the virus already, you didn't, you had the vaccine, you didn't, forever, done. And this will be forever if we don't stop it. Mark my words, that's tomorrow's column. Mark my words, they're already saying that. We need to say this is not okay. like an abused spouse. So some organization, and I apologize, I don't want to plagiarize their work. They put out this chart of 15 ways to know you're being abused. And I looked at them, and every one of them applies now. Tell you what to wear, who to talk to, what to say. It's unbelievable. That is not okay. The first lesson you tell a woman is you might, have burnt the chicken one night, and maybe there's things you could do better in the marriage. He can't punch you. That's just not okay. We could talk about what government can and can't do. We could talk about the laws of quarantine. You cannot do this. And it's because we've lost the contact with our state legislatures. So we've allowed governors to just go for 9 months, put out a press conference. Hey, here's the deal. 8 o'clock tonight. I'm putting out a press conference. Sometimes it's a tweet. Here's what we're doing. How did we come to that? How have we even acceded to that premise? And we acceded to it for 15 days to flatten the curve. And we're on 15 years to flatten our life, liberty, and property. And that's the thing. Look, I will say this blatantly, and I'll get you in trouble, and I'll get Meckler in trouble, and I'll get you all in trouble, but I don't care. We are well beyond the threshold that Jefferson in the Declaration and in the various state constitutions, particularly the 13 original, my home state of Maryland has very strong language that it is slavish devotion, the doctrine of non-resistance. It is well beyond the threshold to alter and abolish a tyrannical government. You look at what King George did, it was nothing. It was ridiculous. Now, the revolution was smart because they rebelled when they still can. Nip the shoots of arbitrary power in the bud, Adams told a friend who was not so enthusiastic about going up against the British over a 3-pence tax on tea. And that was the point. And that was the point of Patrick Henry's "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, if you look at the context of it. They were smart. We let the genie out of the bottle. That's the point there. This is well beyond that. If everyone says, Daniel, do we need a revolution? We needed a revolution before the COVID fascism, and certainly now. The problem is, what are you going to do? I mean, practically, what are you going to do? And the best we have is to take, and it's also the most orderly way of doing things, is to take the legitimate institutions you do have that are the closest to the people and politically, I would say, more fixable in more states than Congress clearly is. Get on their case. Get on their case and say, look, we're not going to take this anymore. I forget which movie that is, where we're fed up and we're not going to take it anymore. And that's what we need, everyone to gather in strike force, Liberty Strike Force teams. It only takes 10 or 15. The Soros guys do this all the time. Nobody focuses on state legislation. If there's one good thing that came out of COVID, it's that people learn it's not the feds that could really come in there and shut you down, your life, liberty, and property. It's the county and state health department. If we would fortify the state legislatures, look, we have 31 Republican controlled. I'll take 10. I'll take 10. Right now, Jonathan, name me the number of states you could send your kids to school without child abuse. 0. And I love Ron DeSantis, but at the end of the day, the rest of the Republicans, the legislature, they're not where he is, most of them. And they need to be pressured. There's a limit to how much he's willing to go out on a limb when he's 10 light years away from every other Republican. There's a lot more even Florida could do. This is where it's at. And once we make state legislatures great again, you know what? Biden could flatulate all he wants from that Oval Office. We're having men and female bathrooms in sports. You could talk about it. It's not happening. Madison in Federalist 46 talked about this. He said he left off the notion that the feds could encroach upon the states if the people and the legislatures are united. He said they have the means of opposition to it, and it's powerful and at hand because they implement this stuff. What are the feds going to do already? And he talked about, here's the formula: the disquietude of the people, their repugnance and perhaps refusal to cooperate with officers of the union, the frowns of the executive magistrate of the state, that's the governor, the embarrassments created by legislative devices, state legislatures passing sanctuary resolutions. This is unconstitutional. We're a constitutional sanctuary. Obviously, where sentiments of several adjoining states happen to be in unison, would present obstructions which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. You guys have done already 15 states. Same thing. Imagine if we took that same process, 15 states had a sanctuary declaration. There are no suspensions of property rights going on in the states. If the FBI wants to come and arrest Mark Meckler for incitement and racism, for pushing the Convention of the States, and believe me, they are coming for people like me. This is not just about people that bashed in windows at the Capitol, and I think we're starting to see that they are literally coming after people for assembly and speech just simply being there. We do not do that in this state. This notion that the feds could come in with the FBI and the badges and somehow overpower it doesn't work that way.
Right. And, it's funny that you bring up revolution. Our buddy Pete Hegseth often says Convention of States is the American Revolution without the bullets. And I absolutely believe that. But, I think everything you touched on is so spot on, because we're dealing with a lot of major problems. And I think that the solution to many of these problems is Convention of States. You talk about developing relationships with legislators and everything. That's what we have to do to pass the resolution. But it goes beyond just passing the resolution. Could you talk maybe a little bit about how Convention of States can be part of that solution?
So let me say, what I'm seeing now lies at, I would say, the crux of our inability to make red states red again. And what I mean by that is like these 80-20 majorities in these Republican legislatures, and you literally have Cuomo's COVID policies going on there. I mean, and they're spewing the same talking points and everything. So we had, and we were really unlucky. I mean, this is the Satan's work, where it had the COVID fascism right after the 2020 legislative sessions. So they had like 8 months of free reign, those governors. That's something we need to talk about. I think keeping the legislatures in session. You want to have an emergency, state legislatures have to be potentially in session all year. That's something that needs to be talked about. Now they're coming back in and they're starting to address this. There's some good news. But what I'm finding the biggest impediment is the money, the federal trough. They would rather free food than freedom. This is a huge problem. You might have seen in Wisconsin, they were this close to getting rid of the mask mandate. Oh, we're going to lose the food share funding. I know in Idaho, Governor Brad Chicken Little, who is the governor there, indistinguishable from Cuomo, by the way, and Gavin Newsom. I challenge anyone to find a difference. This is a state that Trump carried by 40 points. I don't get it. We need to focus on these states better, on the primaries better, and pressure them better. The fight is not in Washington, it's in Boise. And he's like, we're going to lose the FEMA funding. Where am I headed with this? What you're doing with the Convention of States, it's going to reorient the pyramid of governance. Right now, to borrow a Yiddish word, states are schleppers for the federal government. They are literally servile for them. They rely on them for everything. And this is the problem. To the extent you can even get Republicans on board, it's like, yeah, but the money, like, what are we going to do? It always gets back to the money. I'm noticing every time we want them to push back, it's the money. And, that's where Biden's really gonna get them with the carrot and stick with that. And I think what you're going to do with this is, and I'm just saying, one idea to limit their power is to have taxation through the states, and the feds just take a flat tax off of the state revenue, and the states would lead the way on the orientation, the amount, whatever it is. You want a bigger government in California? Bigger federal government? That's awesome. Pay for it. Have bigger state taxes. The feds will get a bigger chunk. We will starve it. It's called the neutral tax. There's a website on that. A friend of mine concocted it. These are the type of things, limiting, balancing the budget. You choke off the ability to do that. Now, I want to be very clear. We need to establish the relationships in the states and make them redder again and make state legislatures great again so we can have a proper convention of the states. Because right now, the way it is, I'm just telling you this, if you had 38 states magically agree to it, the federal courts would say it's racist or something. The media, because the media is the new constitution. I'm not kidding. Whatever they say is the law. It is literally affecting individual litigation. If the media says someone's a threat, they could be arrested for trespassing and they will be held without bail. And that's happening now. But if they're BLM and they literally kill a cop and burn a police station to the ground, they get off with 5,000 bail and Kamala Harris bails them out. I don't think the cops in Minneapolis are going to get a fair trial. Rodney King did. The court system was pretty good until recently. It is no longer like that. That is very scary. Virtue signaling, and I think this is a long discussion. I think social media has really done this, and we need to operate under that assumption. It has remade the way everything works. So I think we have to make state legislatures great again. So at least we have state, because I'm just telling you right now, California and New York, let's say you can get, I believe there's 31 Republican legislatures. I believe that if you get the ones you have now and Republicans win in the midterms, which they usually do when Democrats overreach and they're in charge, it's a rerun of 2010. They should get Minnesota, Maine, New Mexico, and Nevada. They need 3 out of those 4. You can get to 34. This is actually within reach. I think it could happen. And then once you get 34 and you have a very strong push behind it, it's possible you can get 38. But I think we agree, you take the 10 most liberal states, they're going to do their own thing. They already have not a convention of the states, but a constitutional convention, or an unconstitutional convention. They have it every day. They do what they want. The federal government does what they want. They did more on March 16th, 2020 with the COVID constitution, than anything we ever hoped to accomplish. So, they told the federal government where to go when it came to immigration enforcement. Hey, we're not doing that here. Illegals are welcome here. So they are not going to listen to whatever we do. I mean, those states are lost. I challenge anyone to come up with a better solution to that. But if we assert the will of the majority of the people in these states that want a balanced budget, they want term limits, they want to be localism, to be able to have a say in the important decisions. And we're not talking about focusing on garbage collection. We're talking about fighting the national civilization issues at a local level. You throw any issue at me, I'll show you a way you could gum up the works in the red states if we actually had red states. Even foreign policy, like, if you want to mess with his coddling to Iran, the states could refuse to do business with Iran. But certainly domestic policy, refugee resettlement, we're not doing that here. If the left was able to do that unconstitutionally, we should certainly be able to do that with the issues that belong to either the people or the states. If they could create a sanctuary for MS-13 and previously deported sex offenders who don't even belong in the country, our states should definitely be able to create a constitutional sanctuary for American business owners, school children, First Amendment, breathing free without a Chinese diaper. These are just a few things that I think we can do, but the Convention of the States is what I think is going to be the ultimate mechanism that's going to, I guess, be that divorce, the final divorce papers from this abusive relationship.
Yeah. Mark talks about the great decoupling and how we kind of almost need to decouple as a society and just understand that people are going to have their own differences. They've always had differences throughout our history as a country, and that's okay. But we need to just be okay with the fact that everybody has their differences. But, you talk about some things that we can do beyond Convention of States. And for those of you who are unaware, with the 15 states that we have passed our resolution, we're actually working on some non-COS legislative activity. So we're going in there and we're trying to work on election integrity. We're going into some of these states and we're trying to work on some refunding of taxpayer lobbying. There are a lot of different things that we can approach to kind of build that culture of self-governance, but we need to pass the resolution in your state. So if you haven't passed your resolution, get involved, sign up today, become a district captain, help us out, get that resolution passed, and then we can really start to work on self-governing and really build up the state and everything like that. So go to conventionofstates.com, click on the Take Action tab. Now, Daniel, I do want to go to a few questions that we've got from the audience, and I think this one's going to be right up your alley because I know where you're going to be next week. So Joseph was saying, Daniel, I hear you reading from the Federalist Papers. It seems like these kinds of things are not taught in our schools today. Do you think part of the solution is education, helping people to understand the founding and the Declaration and the Constitution? And I mentioned where you're going next week because that's, I think, part of it. But what do you think about Joseph's question? Do you think that's part of the solution?
See, this is what we're talking about with self-governance. It's not just state legislatures. It's a great decoupling. It's reclaiming sovereignty. I'm only in my mid-30s. My entire life, we were not operating as a constitutional republic. I mean, we know that. I mean, long before this, I would die to go back to the days of when I was a kid and my father would take me to Ross Perot's United We Stand meetings, and he was talking about it was 3 trillion in debt, I think he was yelping about back then. And I would, you look at the welfare numbers from 92 and any measure, the illegal immigration numbers, the crime. I mean, crime was bad. Now we've come full circle. We're back to pre-92 levels. This is a lost generation, and what we're doing is not working. And we kept when you have surgery and you need hand surgery, your bones aren't working properly. I don't want to do the surgery. You hobble along, but it was never really sustainable. That's really where we've been. I believe this is somewhat of God's providence. The left is throwing us out. And it's not just at a governance level. It's the big tech, okay? It was never sustainable because they controlled the algorithms. They screwed with us all the time, even before the blatant thing. We always had to worry about what we said. In the schools, if you're a teacher, you couldn't be a conservative. If you're a lawyer, the Bar Association is trash and needs to be reformed. That's a whole nother project to decouple the Bar Association from state legislatures and the judicial system. The medical system, boy, oh boy, we're seeing they're all a bunch of communists. If you're a conservative, you got to put your head down. And most importantly, the schools. What are we fighting to do? Reopen the schools. I was thinking to myself, you know what? Screw it. The teachers' unions don't want to teach, don't teach. What if we started Patriot Academies? Patriot Academies. Picture, I'm a big fan of homeschooling. I homeschool my kids now because of the mask fascism. And I'm glad, I did it because of the masks. They went to private school, but they're getting better education anyway. I'm doing the surgery that needed to be done. I'm reclaiming my sovereignty. Now, not everyone could do homeschooling. It's very hard with work schedule. So you have pods being created, but sometimes you need a little bit more substantial thing than that. What if all these conservative teachers that have to put their head down and get reprimanded in public school and even private school, and I've been to private school my whole life, my kids have been, and they've become wards of the state too because of the funding mechanisms. We started Patriot Academies where it wouldn't just be religious. That's usually where private schools are, and then they become wards of the state. It would be focused exactly on this point. I think now is the time that even when they reopen the schools, it's going to be with a degree of, let me tell you this, if they would do this 12 months ago, they would be in jail for child abuse. And the dystopian concentration camp like setup, and even in concentration camps, they didn't mask them. That's one thing they didn't do. And I don't mean to get insensitive with that, but I just, I want to shock our consciences because I think we've become too used to this. That is the way to do it. Take yes for an answer. And it's hard, but we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to start our parallel platforms, parallel medical, certainly parallel legal, and most importantly, parallel schools. We're trying to revive a dead horse. The public schools are irremediably broken. That battle needed to happen 30 years ago. Reagan talked about that in his farewell address. And he said it was pretty bad in 89. 31 years later, we're done. We're done with that. The only way is, and I'd love to get involved in that, but start in a couple of counties, Patriot academies, make them very decentralized. Each one will be its own franchise. That's an idea to think about.
Absolutely. And next week, you're going to be taking the back out at front site for the constitutional defense course with our buddy Rick Green, who we've partnered with and have been doing some Patriot Academy courses and teaching the Constitution alive. And if you're able to get out there, I know Daniel's talked about it. Monica Sellers has also been out there for the constitutional defense course. We definitely encourage you to do that and to learn not only the Constitution, but your Second Amendment rights and all about that as well, and how to handle a firearm, which I think is wonderful. And also, if you haven't already been able to join us on Monday nights, we're having a biblical citizenship course with Rick Green. I encourage you to go ahead and register for that. Monica, I don't know if we have the link for that, but maybe you can drop that in the chat. But definitely sign up for that, because I think education is a part of what we're trying to do, especially what we're trying to do with Convention of States. So definitely encourage you all to do that. I think we might have time to squeeze in one more question, Daniel. So Lauren says, after everything that happened with the election this year, it feels like my vote doesn't matter. How can Convention of States solve that problem? How can Convention of States help with the, I guess, election integrity?
You don't have to vote. It's hard to have fraud here. I'm not trying to poo-poo voting, but I've always said this on my show. If you get a group of agitators and you get on your legislators at a very local level, I have 100,000 Twitter followers. You go and, you go and tweet at Cuomo, he's used to that, and he's not going to notice it. You go on some of these like Senate majority leader within a state legislature and some of these people, you could really make that. You're going to have an outsized share of influence. You call, you have a few people come and meet with them. That's much bigger than voting. Now, I do think, at least in some of the redder states within the redder districts, I still think primaries will matter. And it's, the carrot and the stick. You try to encourage them to do the right thing, but the primaries start now, not later, now, for school board, for sheriff, for county commissioner and state legislature, county prosecutor, county judge. I mean, this is the fulcrum of everything that matters to our life now, and the COVID stuff should teach us that. So I think that is really where it's at. Make it local. If you live in San Francisco or Baltimore, like me, I can't help you, but there are but you could join other teams in other states, and maybe if you're successful, you'll want to move there. So that's I think the thing with Convention of the States. You actually don't really have to vote and worry about the voter fraud to deal with that.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And folks, before we sign off, I did want to mention that our guest for the next webinar, we've been talking about education. Well, we're going to be joined on March 10th. That's another Wednesday at 8 p.m. by the great David Barton, historian, scholar, activist, founder of Wall Builders. So you'll definitely want to check that out. Of course, a big Convention of State supporter, so I encourage you to check that out. And that's, again, on Wednesday, March 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern. So same day and time as this one. Folks, again, I encourage you, get Stolen Sovereignty, check out the Conservative Review podcast, and also follow him on Twitter. I think it's at RM Conservative, right, Daniel?
Yep.
Thank you so much, Daniel Horowitz, for joining us this evening. Really appreciate it. God bless you, sir, and thank you for supporting Convention of States.
Take care. God bless you all. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much. Good night, everyone. We'll see you next time. God bless you all.